All right. Hello, everybody. I have a really awesome episode for you today. I got two really good listener questions that I'm answering. The first one is about somebody who's afraid that they're driving their therapist crazy by repeating the same things. They're afraid that they're dragging them down with their own issues. And so we talk all about not only how common that is, but ways that you can go about addressing it. The second question is a little bit heavier. It's from somebody who has left an abusive marriage and they're worried that their ex is now using the kids against them. And so what can be done about that? So if those sound interesting to you, stick around. It's a great episode. Let's dig in. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist and a self-help author from Southern California. My goal is to make mental health content for real people, just like you. And in this show, I answer your questions or dive deep into topics related to life, psychology, mental health, relationships, and more. Please be aware that sometimes I use some spicy language, and I also don't shy away from sensitive topics, but I will try to give you a content warning whenever it's relevant. So if all this sounds good to you, let's get started. All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. Thank you for joining me. This is episode 389. I hope that you are well. It's been a pretty good week for me. I'm feeling all right. A little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. So let's just jump into it. I have a couple great questions for you, and I will dive straight into the first one. So first question reads, a recurring theme for me is worrying about my therapist. I worry that she will be frustrated or annoyed with me because I feel like I talk about the same crap over and over. When I talk about body dysmorphia issues, I worry that it will make her feel badly about her own body too. I worry that I will drag her down with me, if that makes sense. She says she isn't annoyed or frustrated and that she feels very cared for that I worry like this. And it seems totally sincere. It's just so hard to convince myself that I'm not a burden to her. Is this a normal reaction? If you've experienced this with clients, what are some ways you've addressed this? So, hello. First off, great job getting some therapy. Regardless of your assessment of how well you're doing in therapy, I think it's so important that you've made the choice to get some therapy in the first place. It's a really great way of taking care of yourself, and I'm glad that you've been able to prioritize your own self in this way. As with many questions that I take on the show, I think this one is going to apply to many people. I can't tell you the number of times I've had someone apologize to me for similar concerns as their therapist. You asked, if you've experienced this with clients? Absolutely. So thank you for putting a voice to concerns that many people have. I think there's a lot of people that will appreciate that. Now, as to your question, you actually, from what I can see, have multiple questions in here. So we'll try to address them one at a time. You're asking if your therapist is frustrated at you for what feels like repetitive conversations. You're asking if you need to be concerned that you might be making her feel bad about her body by talking about your body dysmorphia. And just to clarify, guys, body dysmorphia is the perception of your body in a way that is not accurate and is negative, right? So the feeling that your body is gross or grotesque or out of shape in some sort of way. It's not just sort of having like not good self-esteem. It's like literally looking in the mirror and seeing something different, or at least having the feeling that you are not, what other people see from the outside. So body dysmorphia. And then lastly, you're wondering about, how these things could be addressed. So taking it from the top, is your therapist annoyed at you? Probably not. I would say probably not. You have to keep in mind that you are seeing her once a week, maybe a couple times per month. Not sure what the frequency is, but, every so often. But you personally have to live with the thoughts and issues that you're working on every single moment of every single day. She only gets that front seat view and actually engages with what you're dealing with when you're in session together. Of course, she probably thinks about you outside of session, plans, things like that, but it's very different. And this is one of the things that helps us be good supports as therapists. We certainly have our own issues at times, and we can't help our own friends and family in the same way that we can help our clients. But that's because we get to have this special balance of caring for you and being invested in what you're going through, but also a degree of separation and detachment because we don't exist within your personal sphere. We're not a personal friend. We're not a loved one. We're not, in a relationship or something like that. So it's sort of this unique in-between place, and that is part of the power of why therapy works. And I would say that covering similar content in therapy overall is not a bad thing. You're there for a reason, right? If these issues were so easy to just, snap your fingers and stop, you would have done that years ago. So the fact that you keep coming back to certain topics in therapy is an indicator that they're just sticky issues, things that are resistant to your efforts to change them. And that's okay. That's normal. But please also, this is for everybody. Keep in mind that you are not the one who is in charge of guiding your therapy. Sure, bring your concerns in, in the areas that you would like to make progress in, things that you would like to discuss. Absolutely. You should be an active participant in therapy. And the more that you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. But it's the therapist that's supposed to guide you and help you find your way toward that change. That's literally their job, right? So don't feel like you need to absolutely know what you have to do there. If you feel like you're not getting anywhere because you guys aren't doing the right type of work together, you're not focusing on the right things, or maybe the intervention isn't quite right, that's totally valid. But you don't need to worry about your therapist being annoyed at you. Every therapist is different, but it seems like your therapist that you're describing here isn't afraid to talk to you about your therapeutic relationship. And that's great, right? You said that she feels cared for by your concern. And I think that discussing the dynamics between the two of you, the actual elements of your therapeutic relationship, is a very powerful tool in therapy. The reason I'm mentioning this is that she probably wouldn't be afraid to address it if she were concerned that you guys were not progressing in the best way. There are some cases where an issue just needs to be revisited and continually hashed out over a long period of time. For example, if I'm working with somebody, and this is hypothetical, but if I'm working on somebody on agoraphobia, right? So difficulty leaving the house, difficulty being away from their safe spaces, and that agoraphobia stemmed from childhood abandonment, you bet your ass we're going to be talking about both of these things, right? The agoraphobia and, the long-term or in the past stuff from childhood over and over and over, right? We're going to talk about the exposure work. We're going to talk about the weekly activities and experiences they have. And we're going to go through those learning experiences that they had as a child over and over through months or even years of working together. So sometimes it does require that repetition. I will also say that in my own work, personally, I'm always willing to point out if I think that things are becoming repetitive in an unproductive way. For example, I might say to somebody, hey, I want to point out something if that's okay. I don't want you to take this as a judgment. You're doing a great job. This isn't about that. But, we did start talking about your desire to end your relationship. I looked at my notes and it's been about 6 months now. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the struggle you're having with this. But I also want to make sure that I'm supporting you in the right way and that we're not just trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? I want to make sure this is productive for you. I don't just want to keep you in a holding pattern. What are your thoughts about that? Right? Totally make-believe hypothetical example, but essentially I'm trying to say that it's our job as therapists to redirect when things are becoming unproductive and to notice that. If clients had to constantly worry about knowing exactly what they should be doing in therapy, I don't think therapy would really work. One mental trick that you can use here is to recognize that you're asking your therapist to believe you, right? When you tell her things, you're asking her to believe that your narrative is true and to validate your experience. That's probably a big part of why you trust her. Well, believing her word when she says that you're not annoying is also a way to show her that you trust and respect her, right? You don't need to assume that she would be unable to tell you if she had concerns. Instead, you can remember that, you see her as a strong person. You see her as somebody that's capable of expressing concerns and advocating for herself if she needs it. So you can give her the benefit of the doubt, and it's a gift to her of your trust and the benefit of the doubt because she deserves it. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop feeling like you're, wasting time, wasting her time, or that you're going around in circles, but maybe it can mean that you don't have to believe those thoughts quite as much when they do pop up. And you can recognize that you don't really need to solve the problem because it's probably actually not a problem. Now, before we jump into the second part of your question about dragging her down with you, I want to take a quick break and talk about our first sponsor today. This episode is brought to you by Air Doctor. The weather is getting nicer around where I live, which is great because I can spend more time outdoors. But regardless, it's still true that I spend the majority of my time indoors, especially during the work week. In fact, it's estimated that Americans spend on average 90% of our time indoors. According to the EPA, indoor air can be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air, which means a lot of opportunity to be exposed to airborne allergens like pollen, dust mites, or mold. So what can you do? Air Doctor has created an air purifier that filters out contaminants and allergens so your lungs don't have to. It uses an ultra HEPA filter that's been independently tested to remove over 99% of particles as small as 0.003 microns in size. To put that into perspective, average pollen size is about 25 microns. So if you'd like to breathe cleaner air in your home or office, check out Air Doctor's 30-day no questions asked money-back guarantee. Head over to airdoctorpro.com and use the promo code DUFF. And depending on the model, get this, you can get up to 40% off. That's airdoctorpro.com, airdoctorpro, airdoctorpro.com, with the promo code DUFF for up to 40% off. So yes, there was a second part to your question, which was about dragging your therapist down with you, especially in regards to discussing your body dysmorphia. You never need to be worried about your therapist's mental health. Again, that's their job to manage. You do not need to manage your therapist's mental health. Everybody hear me about that? That's not your responsibility. Do not try to manage your therapist's mental health. If there's something that they are not equipped to deal with, or something that is too emotionally triggering for them to do, they should tell you. For example, some people have hard lines about dealing with, say, eating disorders or sex offenders. And if things veer into that territory, they need to let you know that it's totally not your fault, but it's something that for their own reasons, they're not going to be able to help you with, that they didn't realize this was part of the equation. They have some of their own boundaries they need to respect. And it's not that you did something wrong, but they are not as equipped as somebody else would be to deal with this. That is sort of the extreme end of the spectrum, right? Where you would have to actually switch providers. On the less extreme side, your therapist may have some stuff come up in therapy based on what you say, right? Maybe you talk about something that's very similar to their experience or is just triggering to them for some reason. And it brings up some emotional stuff for them, but this is their job. It's their job. This is their work, and they want to be there and present for you to help you out. If they're having any difficulty with, what has been triggered in them later on, that's why many of us have our own therapists, right? Part of going through the graduate school process and training to become a therapist is learning how to deal with whatever comes up in yourself, how to deal with your own mental health and things of that sort. Now, some of us are better than others at it, but it's not your job to worry about that. That's not going to impact your care. And if it is going to impact your care, it's your therapist's responsibility to bring that up. So it's not something that you need to try to manage on your own. To put it a different way, I think that this is similar to being concerned that you're going to hurt your massage therapist's hands or your chiropractor's hands, right? That's literally their job. You don't need to take care of them. They use their hands for work, and they're expecting them to sometimes be fatigued. They're expecting to work around any injuries they have. They're expecting to avoid their own sensitivities in their work. So you don't have to worry about that. It sounds like you have already addressed your worries about repetitive content in sessions, but I'm not sure if you've brought up this specific worry about, dragging her down and about the body dysmorphia part of it. There's nothing wrong with addressing it if you would like to talk about it in session. And if you wanted to, you could say something like, I'm not sure if other people are like this, but I always find myself worried about dragging you down too. Right? Like when I talk about my body dysmorphia and all the issues I have, I feel like that could be hard for you too, right? As somebody who is human, maybe you have issues, and I just don't want to trigger you as I'm talking about all of my stuff. Is that hard for you? Right? Just opening it up. And this would be a perfectly reasonable way to bring up a conversation about that topic. And if you came to me with that question, let's say we were doing therapy and you asked that, I would try to give you an honest response. I'd say, it's not necessarily hard. No. I'm human too. I have my own things that I deal with, and I'm not immune to body image issues for sure. But it's different when you're in my position and you're trying to help somebody improve themselves. It is not a burden or triggering to work with you. Please understand that. I'm totally fine in our work together, and I really am interested in helping you out. But if there ever was something that you should know about, the way I'm feeling during our conversations, or something that I couldn't handle for some sort of reason, would you trust me to just tell you about that? Right? In this case, I just feel care and concern for you. You don't need to worry about that. But if it did come up, I could tell you. And when I say that term, I could tell you, I don't mean like confide, you're not going to have your therapist confiding in you and using you as therapy. But again, sort of saying, hey, you know what, we're coming up against something that I'm not equipped for. If we need to really dig into this more, we should probably look at transitioning care or bringing in additional help in some sort of way. Not like, hey, last week was really hard for me. Can we talk about it? Right? You don't need to be your therapist. Now, as a therapist, right? If I were your therapist and I was in those shoes, I probably would want to dig a little bit more into why you're so concerned with taking care of other people when you're literally paying somebody money to help you take care of yourself. But I would try not to be too obnoxious about it. There are some therapists that like everything they read into everything is a question. Like, well, why do you feel that way? Why do you want to know how I feel about that? Why are you asking this? This is an important question in this case, but I would try not to be too annoying about it. I would just be like, what you bring up is valid and it's common, but is this also indicative of a bigger pattern, kind of trying to take care of everybody else, and open up a conversation about that. You asked if this is a normal reaction. I would say yes, to an extent. It's totally normal to have these concerns. But if you've been reassured repeatedly and you just can't stop thinking that you're a burden or that you're frustrating to work with, that may be something that in itself needs looking into. And when it comes to working through this, I think we've already covered some of that. The first step is making your therapist aware that you feel this way, which you've already done, which is great. It can be really, really hard to talk about this stuff. So kudos to you for bringing it out into the light, into the open, big part of the battle. Hopefully some of the comments that I've made here also help, get the gears turning and make you think about this in a little bit of a different way. As humans, we have a very hard time telling ourselves to stop having specific thoughts, right? To say, okay, I'm just going to try to think about that less. Bullshit. That doesn't work, right? I don't think that's really reasonable. Instead, what you might try to do is, honor the fact that you are having a desire to, say, check in with her or to apologize or to try to protect her feelings, and recognize that that's real, but then try to divert yourself and choose to take a different action. You don't have to pretend like you feel nothing, but instead, when you feel those urges, take a moment to be curious about it and ask yourself, why? Like, why am I feeling this way? Maybe even consider writing a note to yourself, that maybe I need to journal later about these thoughts and worries, and then try to redirect back to the work that you're doing with your therapist instead of diving all the way into that right now. But even if you do bring it up several times, the same comments that I made before apply. You are allowed to revisit topics. If you can't shake the fact that you feel like you're a burden, then say you've already talked about it, but you still can't help feeling like a burden, right? Just continue to bring it up and work through it, and it will get better. So I hope these thoughts are helpful to you. I'm sure your therapist is proud of you. Keep up the good work. Okay, and before we get into the second question, let us take a break and talk about the next sponsor for this episode. This episode is brought to you by OneSkin. Very excited about them being a sponsor today because I have been a dry guy recently. Lately, I've been noticing after a long day of typing, handling papers, cleaning, cooking, doing stuff with the kids, my hands feel insanely dry and uncomfortable. Because of this, I've been loving my OneSkin products, especially their body lotion that can be used wherever I'm feeling dry and tight, not just my hands, face, neck, elbows, knees, everywhere. OneSkin is great because all of their products are powered by a peptide they invented called OS1, which helps to reduce the accumulation of damaged aging cells. This is what makes your skin feel less resilient. So instead of just masking these issues, OneSkin addresses them at the cellular level, which not only helps with moisture and hydration, but also protection from the elements. With spring approaching and some sunshine around the corner, it may be a good time to check out one of their newer products, OS1 Shield, which is an SPF, so sun protectant, that also protects against the UV-induced aging that can occur from being outside. For a limited time, you guys, the listeners, can get an exclusive 15% off OneSkin products using the code DUFF when you check out at oneskin.co. That's oneskin.co with the code DUFF for 15% off. Okay, so let's dive into the second question. It reads, Hi, Dr. Duff. First of all, I love your podcast and it's helped me in ways I can't even describe. Thank you very much. I'm writing today because last year I went through a divorce. I left a marriage that was abusive. We experienced anger outbursts on a consistent basis, and my oldest watched a lot of things that her dad chose to do. I really thought leaving would end the abuse, but it turns out it just makes it worse with him. It seems like he swapped over to the kids. We have 3 young girls, and he's actively used our oldest, 11, to vent his frustrations about the divorce. He's told my kids that they shouldn't live with me because I don't take care of them like he does. He's told them that he hates me, he hates my house, he blames me for the choices that he wants to make with them, causing a lot of tension between my oldest and I. I often now hear my children actively repeating some of the terrible things that he says to me, letting me know that he's saying it to them too. I requested that he do mutual consent for therapy for the kids because unfortunately our area needs that. He fought and fought, but finally agreed now. However, my 11-year-old is voicing the same things that he does about therapy. She's refusing to go. I really feel like he's actively doing what he can to destroy my relationship with the kids as punishment for leaving him. I'm so lost and I see what he's doing to them. I just don't know how to help anymore. Thank you. Okay, well, first off, I want to say I'm really sorry that you've had to go through this and that your family is going through this. It's not fair, and I know it's not what you hoped for when you had kids, and there's nothing that, compares to that sense of, guilt that you can have, especially as a mother, seeing your kids go through things and feeling like you could have done something differently. So I'm really sorry they have to experience that. I also want to say that I believe you. I'm sure there are a lot of pieces of your experience where you felt alone and unseen or maybe not even believed. I know the pattern that you're describing here, and you are absolutely not alone in it. Before getting into the nitty-gritty of actually trying to answer the question, I just want to continue to emphasize that point, that you're not alone. If you go online, there are a bunch of support groups out there for women that have gone through or are going through similar things, especially in the context of divorce. There are groups that, also forums and message boards and things of that sort that are more specifically geared toward co-parenting, custody, leaving abusers. So even if it's just to show yourself that you're not alone, I highly suggest checking some of these out. Unfortunately, what you're describing is pretty common. When you have somebody that is abusive, that cycle of abuse doesn't tend to just go away once you exit the problem, right? Once you get away, if you're still maintaining contact, that gives the abuser a source to dive into and continue that pattern of abuse and control. So when that abusive parent is still in the picture, they have this opportunity through co-parenting. It's all too easy for them to start using the kids as a means to abuse or control you as well. Maybe you've noticed before you left, right, when you guys were still together, that he would tend to isolate you or make you feel alone, like the world's against you and that you're crazy, he's the reasonable one. This really isn't too different from that, except now he's trying to use his influence to cause those that you love, especially your children, to see you in a negative light. I understand that you've tried to get your eldest into therapy to discuss some of this, but it's been hard because she's resistant to it. Honestly, at this point, I'm most concerned about you. Are you getting support and resources? Because this doesn't just seem like the normal run-of-the-mill divorce situation. This seems really messy and difficult. So, in addition to getting your own individual therapy and possibly support groups, maybe you want to reach out to resources in your area related to family violence, abusive relationships, divorce mediation, things like that. From what you're describing, it sounds like the violence wasn't necessarily physical. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but even if it wasn't physical, it doesn't make it any less valid. And at the very least, finding organizations with this sort of focus, it can help you get pointed in the right direction. This is a very, very personal thing, right? I can't tell you exactly what to do about it. In some cases, situations like this require legal action. If you're afraid that your kids are not being treated appropriately under his care, that's where legal action comes in. In other instances, there just simply isn't enough specific evidence to move towards something like that, like something such as obtaining sole custody, and it wouldn't go through in court. And instead, it's more about doing whatever you can to counter the influence from their father. I think either way, right now would be a really good time for you to start documenting things. So keep a notebook or write notes on your phone, voice messages, whatever it needs to be, but write down things that you are concerned about, things that you hear your kids say, right? That point to maybe negative things that their father is saying to them, anything like that. And, this could be as simple as, hearing your 11-year-old say, daddy hates you and thinks we should just stay with him, something like that. All of this could be used in court proceedings if necessary at some point. And even if it doesn't get to that point, it may simply be something that you need to remind yourself that you're not making this up, and potentially something to look back on as you continue to address the ramifications of all of this down the line with your kids, right? Maybe their memory of this is going to change over time. Maybe they're not going to remember the influence of their father. They're just going to know what it felt like to, see you in a certain way. And you can pull this out and say, look, this is the stuff I was noticing back then. This is why. And if you need to address it down the line, it's just helpful to have that sort of documentation. I would also encourage you to try to talk with your kids honestly about the situation, to invite their thoughts and feelings and try to listen without reacting too strongly. But then on your side, also don't be afraid to tell them what's going on, of course, in language that they can understand, right? You mentioned you have an 11-year-old as your oldest. I'm not sure what the other ages are, but you're going to have to modulate to be as appropriate as you can for their developmental level. But at 11 years old, you're starting to understand more about the world. And you could say something to your 11-year-old like, do you remember how things were, really scary sometimes before your father left? He used to yell a lot because he was mad at me, which is part of the reason we don't live together anymore, because we didn't get along and we had that sort of loudness. Well, your father is very mad at me for leaving, and I think that he wants you to be mad at me too, which is why sometimes he says bad things about me or about our house in front of you. And I want you to know, you don't need to pick sides. You are allowed to feel however you feel, but I do want you to know that I love you more than anything. And I am always trying to make choices that are good and safe for you. Now, your father has a right to see you and spend time with you, but we really shouldn't be bad-mouthing each other. I try not to tell you all these bad things about your dad, and he shouldn't be doing that about me either. It's not a very grown-up thing to do. So if there is ever something that you hear that you have questions about, if you're ever concerned about something your father says, please don't be afraid to talk to me. I promise you will not get in trouble because of what he says or what you ask me about. It's just important that if there's something that you don't understand, to talk to me about it, because I love you and I want to make sure that we get through this okay. Right. I kind of riffed on that, but this is a way that you might be able to not hold back. One of the things that can happen is, you have two partners, and I've seen this play out. Directly in some cases where you have, exes, and, you have one parent who is trying to be as diplomatic as possible, trying to follow the rules, trying to be, a good co-parent, and maybe even taking classes, what have you. And then the other one doesn't give a shit about that, right? They are just trying to use the kids as an accessory to get back at the other parent, or they're trying to make the kids realize, or, trying to teach them that the other parent is bad so they could pull more and more of their allegiance to them, things of that sort. And so you get this really imbalanced perspective. And while I don't suggest sort of just laying into, their dad in front of them in the way that he may be doing, I also wouldn't avoid the topic and just sort of try to keep being extremely diplomatic about it if they do need to understand a bit about what's going on. I hope that makes sense. I've seen people who regret not being a little bit more clear with their kids about the situation because they were trying to be good about it. And, even if you say it the wrong way, even if it doesn't make sense to them, addressing it is going to be better than not. And you can always continue clarifying and things of that sort. If you're not able to find a good way to connect and articulate this to your kids, maybe that is a good way that you could use therapy, sort of as a bridge to have a provider help you express yourself and have the kids, express themselves in a safe way. Another avenue to consider is other people in your kids' lives. Do they have other relatives on either side of the family that they talk with and interact with? If so, maybe you can talk with those people and, explain your concerns to them and see what they have to say. it can be so very helpful to have an ally that's not one of the parents. Let's say they have, a good relationship with an aunt or uncle that understands the dynamic here. They understand that your ex is abusive. They know why you left. Again, this could be either side. I've seen this play out where it's, the abusive parent's sister, for instance, that the other ex is still, talking to because she's like, hey, I get it. I grew up with it too, etc. But, having those people on the inside of the bubble, but just outside, the parent sphere, it can make them a good, subtle influence on the kids or even somebody that they could confide in. Now, aside from trying to mitigate and reduce the damage done by your ex by getting the kids appropriate care, talking with them, directly addressing the situation, you might also make it a point to simply just work really hard on continuing to improve your relationship with the kids. In some cases, I'm sure that's easier said than done. But if they know that you are a safe place, that you want them to have fun and be happy and enjoy their lives, that you will do whatever it takes to try to take care of them, they will understand that their father's statements are only one side of the coin. Even if they believe him full-heartedly, right now, that won't necessarily last forever. And if you continue showing them through your actions that you are, like I said, a safe person to talk to, that you care about them, that you're going to show up, etc., that also will get through to them. I said this before, but sometimes we get so focused on addressing the problem that's right in front of our face that we end up neglecting some of the other aspects that could be helpful. So, spending quality time, investing whatever you can into their specific interests, small indulgences, things like that can go a long way. Ultimately, though, without legal means to address the situation, your ex can say really whatever he wants about the world or about their life with you. And all you can do is try to balance those scales and do your best as a parent. There are resources that you can access to make sure that you're taken care of. And, trying to help the kids with resources is also a great idea if you're able to. But don't forget that the kids have long lives ahead of them. There is plenty of time to keep working at this and plenty of time for them to develop and be able to think more for themselves about the situation. Just because things seem rocky and maybe out of control right now, it doesn't mean you're going to lose them. It doesn't mean that things will be this way forever. So I just want you to know you're not crazy. This isn't a failure of your own parenting. Don't be afraid to reach out and consult with resources, even if you don't think that you deserve to, or maybe they won't be able to help. Just ask. Talk to therapists, talk to local organizations, talk to online forums, talk to lawyers. Get some feedback, get some help. You deserve it. So thank you very much for writing that in and for trusting me with the question. That is the end of the episode, everybody. Thank you very, very much for spending some time with me. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you for the next one. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. If you would like to send a question or a topic for a future episode, please email me at duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you like my approach and would like to learn more about my books, online course, or other resources, please head over to my website at duffthepsych.com. And lastly, it would mean so much to me if you would leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to it, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, you got this.